Show presented by Allstate. It's time now to check in with Paul Finebaum, presented by Allstate. Paul, good morning. Not as much. Oh, bullet point that I forgot at the other bullet point. Penn State, Ohio State set up for success. We'll get into all that. But Paul, biggest takeaway. Here we are, week 10, going into November. Not a huge day, but a good enough day.
Yeah, Matt, it's really about A&M. And I'll tell a quick story here to start off because we almost didn't have what we have. After Jimbo Fisher was fired about a year ago, A&M set its sights on Mark Stoops, the University of Kentucky coach. And after Stoops beat Louisville last year on the final regular season weekend, the president and the athletic director at A&M, plus a booster or two, flew to Stoops's house. And guess what? They offered him the job and he accepted. Now you're starting to say, well, how come Mark Stoops was losing again against Auburn on Saturday night while Elko was winning? By the time the plane got back to College Station, the word had got out. There was a revolt underway by some very important people, and they suddenly decided. Remember this story? You were probably on the air at the time. About 1 o'clock in the morning, Mark Stoops issued a statement saying
Yep.
he loves Kentucky and wants to spend the rest of his life there. And then the next morning, they hired Elko, and that's how we ended up with one of the great stories in college football this year.
So, yes, now it's time to just peel this back layer by layer. I said it on Sunday, Bloody Sunday. If you're hearing it for the first time, here's my take on all of that. Because, Paul, you know this better than anyone. When a coaching vacancy comes open at a big time university, there is a thought within that cauldron of people that we need to go get the biggest name possible to make us a story in college football. One problem, that story sometimes ends after the press conference. And all Texas A&M did here was find a guy that's not going to win the presser. He's not going to win the booster room. He's not going to win any of that stuff off the field, but he knows how to coach football. And Texas A&M had to be helped to get to that point because the first guy they wanted, there was a revolt. And now they've got one of the best stories this year because Mike Elko goes back to Texas A&M. They're in the driver's seat for an SEC championship just a year after we're sitting here going, God, the Jimbo thing didn't work out. And here's A&M.
And man, I was out there a couple of weeks ago, and it's a very culture related school, and Elko fits that culture. It's very buttoned down culture. They're no nonsense. Jimbo Fisher was just your classic BSer. He wasn't a serious coach. He was a politician, and in some ways, I believe Elko was referring. Well, not in some ways. Of course, he was referring to him last night after the game when he said, "I'm not a politician. I'm not a BSer." He just coaches football, and I know that's like a cliche you can get anywhere you want, but that's what they wanted out there because they want serious people. They want people that know how to do it, not who will tell you how it's going to be done. And we may be seeing something that we've been wondering about for forever, and that's with all the resources that A&M has. And there's really only one school that has more resources, and that's the school down the road in Austin. Can Texas A&M ever break through? And they're on the verge of it because what we saw in that second half last night was unbelievable. I mean, I was getting texts from people in the first half. Brian Kelly, Coach of the Year.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny, too, when you really think about it. Texas A&M needed the assist to get Elko. He wasn't their first choice. And sometimes now we've seen that go horribly wrong.
Sure.
Tennessee revolting against Greg Schiano, ended up with Jeremy Pruitt. Oops. That didn't work out well. But here, sometimes that first choice that you think is going to work and lead you to these great things, and then you have to, I hate using this word, but you have to settle for number two. You think Mike Elko thinks about that anymore? He's like, no, great. I wasn't your first choice, but I was the better coach all along. And now here I am taking your resources, former coaches, recruits. I'm coaching them up. I'm making in-game decisions to go to Marcel Reed because we had nothing going offensively. And now Brian Kelly, year 3, highly paid, big-time name, comes from Notre Dame, is left scratching his head the morning after, up 17-7, in control of the game. And now it's A&M we're talking about year one for a roster that got a little bit picked over. But I mean, this is an unbelievable story none of us had coming into the season.
No, and I was down there for the Missouri game when we were talking to Elko as the game right before the game, and he made the decision then to go with Wegman. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Reed came in for the Florida game about 6, 7 weeks ago. I mean, those are great decisions. I mean, we love to talk about Sark and Ewers and Manning and all these things that we probably don't know much about. But he looked at it and he said, I've got to make a change. And it was one of the great moves of the year. And it probably saved their season because you lose that game and then
Right.
you're on the cut line. But we have a game at the end of the year, which we've always talked about as being a great matchup just because of the intensity. But now it may be for everything with Texas at Texas A&M on the final Saturday. But yeah, that was to me the story of yesterday. I was in Tuscaloosa, so I'm a little bit drunk with Bama. I don't. I mean, the first thing we do is bid adieu to Missouri. I mean, Matt, in the two biggest games this year against A&M and Alabama, they've been outscored, I believe, 75-10.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just frightening how poorly that team has played under the bright lights.
Well, and really, you look at it, and we were going into the season arguing in terms of skill position. Missouri with Brady Cook, Theo Weiss, Luther Burden the third, the transfer running backs, Carroll and Nate Noel. You're like, oh wow, Missouri's loaded. They're the team in the SEC no one's talking about, along with Ole Miss, that could make the playoff. And I mean, I know Brady Cook was out yesterday, but that was ineptitude. That was you couldn't get Burden the ball, you couldn't get Theo Weiss the ball, and it leaves you wondering what. I mean, Drinkwitz wouldn't get a better opportunity than this anytime soon with the guys that he had coming back, plus the schedule that was in front of him.
Oh,
And now the Missouri situation is like, okay, if not now, when's this thing going to progress? Because these guys are gone, and it just leaves you like, how did it happen that way?
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of debate whether it's Texas or Missouri that got the candy cane schedule, but Missouri's toughest non-conference game was Boston College and then UMass. So I mean, it was absurd, and they really got away with it, not having to play Texas or Georgia or programs like that, and they made the least out of it in Alabama. And as you watch the game, I mean, Alabama was hard to watch in the first half
Yep.
against a really good team. They may have been on the ropes, but they were able to impose their will. And what they got out of that game more than anything else is just some confidence into the bye week as they get ready for yet another playoff eliminator. We saw one yesterday with Missouri, and the LSU Alabama game it may not be the marquee game of 2 weeks from now because there's another game that's more important in terms of drama, but
Yeah.
it's the first real playoff eliminator game we've had.
Yes. And what now? I know we hopped off the game, but what now for LSU? Because you see the two losses on their schedule, and I get it. One was to USC, but only one's in conference, so they could theoretically play their way back into the SEC championship. But I mean, it was just so you looked at it and you're like, what happened to Garrett Nussmeier? They were playing so well. So as we sit here this morning, what now for Brian Kelly and LSU?
Well, I mean, it's kind of the same old story for them like last year. I mean, you count the number of points they threw away in the first half. It reminded a little bit like the SC game as well at the beginning of the year. They missed two field goals that were makeable. They couldn't score touchdowns in the red zone, and finally their defense broke. And ultimately, I mean, I was so high on them against Alabama, but Matt, I kind of feel all the wind shifting back toward Alabama right now.
Yeah, and look, Alabama still has work to do. I don't think the Alabama that shows up in the first half against a team like LSU gets it done. It was again credit Mike Elko for the coaching switch and the energy, the defense for getting after Garrett Nussmeier. But I mean, really, and that's kind of my story, and we'll button that up with this, Paul. Let's look at the SEC as a whole. What was the biggest thing that you took away from October in the SEC as we head to the final month of the season?
Well, I mean, I'll finish Alabama. They survived. And I mean, nobody got more attention than Alabama. What was really interesting, Matt, hearing the noise from behind the microphone all week and being there for 24 hours, it just didn't seem as bad. Everybody,
Really?
everybody was still fairly confident. I had an interview with the athletic director, Greg Byrne, on Friday, and I realized some of this is for show. I mean, we are sitting in front of cameras. But I didn't detect a panic situation. The fans were on the brink, but they were holding on because they are Alabama after all, and that carries them a long way. But so I think they dodged it. I'm not about to start speculating on that game against OSU in 2 weeks. But I think that was it. Texas was kind of who we thought we were. I guess Georgia, and I'm going to start there because I they looked unbeatable, even playing terribly at times against Texas. So I'm
Yeah.
kind of back to where we all began, thinking Georgia's the best team. And how many we switched about 3 or 4 times now in the SEC.
Oh, yeah. We've gone from Georgia. We went to Texas for a while, Alabama after they beat Georgia. I mean, it's been a wild month in that league, but I kind of agree with you that as we set to play the first weekend in November, it's like, all right, well, Georgia's still the class. Alabama can still get you. Texas is still right there, and there's still a lot of football left to play. And even Ole Miss isn't out of it after getting their win against Oklahoma yesterday. 3 consecutive losses for Oklahoma. Brent Venables, double digits. I mean, that's probably not the best situation going right now, but it'll be interesting to see how they handle the rest of the season, Paul.
Yeah, I think that's probably what I came away with as well is how underwhelming Oklahoma has been. And, they still have Alabama at the end of the season. They have LSU. So their record, they better take a picture of it. It's not going to look this good when it's all over. I mean, there's so many other stories. Uh, but I mean, and I'm not going to waste the audience's time with how underwhelming. So, but probably if you ask me, like, what's the weirdest game of the year?
Yeah.
It's probably Kentucky going to Oxford and winning
Oh
against
God.
what I thought was a playoff team, and Kentucky can't beat anyone now.
Isn't that like we were sitting there last night? It's like because for a while, Paul, we were saying like, oh well, which Kentucky team is it? Is it the one that got blown out by South Carolina? Is it the one that played Georgia till the very end? Is it the one that beat Ole Miss? And now that thing's just kind of gone. I mean, south of sideways.
Yeah, and listen, Mark Stoops has got a really good resume, but you wonder if after he started putting his coaching staff together to button up the story from 10 minutes ago at midnight, and then found out he wasn't going to be the A&M coach, did he ever recover from that moment?